Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very nice to see you all here in yet another of Suffolk's fantastic market towns here in Hadleigh. I'm Tim, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Suffolk, and our Chief Constable Gareth Wilson, and Danny Cooper, the local inspector, who I'm sure many of you will know or recognise, or certainly know a lot better after tonight. So the format for this evening is going to be a brief presentation by each of us. That will be the first part of the meeting, and then very much over to you, ladies and gentlemen, to ask questions about policing or other concerns of local matter that we can help with. And please don't hang back, don't be embarrassed to ask whatever you like. The whole point of this is to hear good and bad if necessary, or whatever it is, so we can answer your questions and if necessary take particular issues away with us and see what we can do to help you. So that's what it's about. So, this is a Churchill quote that I quite often like to use, but this is quite informative in a way because, as it says there, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak, but also what it takes to sit down and listen. And this is where public engagement in this role is so crucial. Hearing your views and your comments is absolutely vital if we are going to move forwards together for what, after all, in my view, is perhaps the most important public service we've got, for the simple reason that if we're not safe and confident in our domestic and business lives, we might as well all pack up and go home. That's no discredit to any other public services, but that to me is the reality. I'm going to quickly whiz around this jigsaw with a few comments on each before I hand over to Gareth. So, just a brief part, the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is, number one, you're in charge of the budget overall. You delegate functions to the constabulary, but of course that does not mean it's an active application. You need to know what's going on. As you will be aware, finances are tight, the budget is reducing, and Gareth will say a little bit more about that. But it is not by any means all doom and gloom. The current budget of £124 million will be reduced by £20 million over the next 5 years. That is under 4% a year. There are many organisations who have done that, if not more besides. But I'm not for a moment glossing over and saying it isn't difficult, because it is. But we will succeed. Suffolk has always had the reputation of being able to get on with what it has to deal with, rolling up its shirt sleeves and making sure that we're all kept safe, and that is really, really important. And I'm absolutely complete confidence that we can succeed here again. Please bear in mind that whilst the Suffolk Constabulary budget is under pressure, there are other policing resources that many people either don't know about or have never heard of. And that includes the National Crime Agency with a budget of £650 million, the National Counter-Terrorism Network with £450 million, and the local Eastern Region Special Operations Unit, which has got a further £16 million. They deal particularly with the regional issues of organised crime and so on. It's very important that we get this in balance as the pattern of crime changes. So, with the budget, you set the preset. This year it did go up by just over 1.9%. That was the first increase for 3 years. One of the things we have to be aware of is the net level of national debt. That all has to be paid back. It doesn't grow on a tree. And I think it's important that the constabulary does its fair share of commitment to reducing the national debt. It's far too high, and it's a real job for the younger generation who are just leaving education, and the years to come will have to help pay it back. So we've got to make sure we don't leave them with a pretty awful financial legacy. So there are issues there. You're there to hold the Chief Constable to account. So Gareth and his team, when there are questions very much in the public interest, we need to ask why you're doing things in the way you are. PCCs, could I just respectfully remind you, do not interfere in the operational activities of the constabulary. Okay, so there's complete operational independence. It's very important that people understand that. But you are there, as I say, to hold them to account. And then the other major piece of work is the Police and Crime Plan, which is a customised approach, sort of aid memoir for the constabulary, the delivery side here in Suffolk. And I think that is a big improvement over the old police authority, because you're able to customise policing activity to what we need in our county, rather than someone in Brussels or Whitehall telling them what to do. And I hope you would agree the requirements we have here in Suffolk are not the same as metropolitan London or Manchester or the middle of Wales or wherever. That's really important that we do that, so it can reflect our own unique nature. Having said all that, Suffolk, of course, has got a very good police service. We, I think, have the third lowest cost per head of the population for policing. And one gripe I do have with the government, of course, is the funding settlement that we get. We need to work much harder to make sure that Suffolk does get its fair share of resources for policing, and for that matter, for many other public sector settlements. So that's something we are very much on the case of. So the strategic direction there, looking forward, we know budgets are under pressure, but that is where we have to make absolutely sure we are as efficient and effective as possible. We've got a major in-depth budget review process at the moment. We are looking at absolutely everything. And I'm confident we will be finding 5, 10, maybe more percent savings on the budget without affecting the front line. Other organisations have done it, and we jolly well have to do the same. We have to be much more business-like in the way we run the constabulary here in Suffolk. Okay, it's not going to be a private sector PLC, as far as I'm concerned it never would be. It's a vital public service, but we can learn lessons from other parts of the economy, be it public or voluntary sector or the private sector. It doesn't matter, it's how do we do the job better. Moving on very quickly to managing demand, one of the things that has to be done far better in the UK is making sure that other parts of the public sector take their fair share of the burden. We are not a mental health service. At times, a third of constabulary time is used dealing with mental health problems. That's unacceptable. They're under pressure, and mental health, so are we. So let's sit down and talk about how we can do things better together. We could put partnership working in that, because of course the relationships of the future, we have attracted government money from the Transformation Challenge Award. That will give us, including capital receipts, just over £5 million to spend across police, local authorities, health and so on, to improve the service for the public. The way forward, in my view, is very much on the partnership side. How can we pool our resources here in Suffolk, preserving our own identity as an ancient historic county, rather than trying to muddle up things with great big grandiose schemes like one Eastern Region Constabulary. I'm completely opposed to that. I don't think it will work. The East of England Ambulance Service is hardly a ringing endorsement for bigger, always being better. And if you lose your identity as a county, frankly, you're finished. That's one of the reasons I alone took the decision not to put the control room up in Norfolk last year. I think it would have been a retrograde step, had no public support, very little, and it would not have produced the financial savings that were predicted. But what we have to do, we can't stand still, is develop more partnerships. So we've got a very good track record of working with fire and rescue. I'm very pleased the government is going to bring forward some legislation to enable that to actually happen on a more formal basis. We've got 5 shared police and fire stations already. We've got another big government grant of £5 billion to help move that process further forward. It makes absolute sense, as the police minister has said, who used to be a full-time fireman, operationally and financially. So there's a huge range of things we can do there. Very, very important. October the 1st last year, PCCs in England and Wales became responsible for victims commissioning. That was a major change, at last putting victims at the centre of the criminal justice system. Again, it's not perfect, there's a long way to go, but we do need to understand the needs of the victims, be they individuals or businesses, have to be served far better than they have in the past. Very, very pleased that we were able to find over £1 million to invest in a new independent domestic violence system with the advisors, given to Lighthouse Women's Aid. Domestic violence is a pretty serious issue. It's top of one of our priorities here. The fact that 90% of the victims are women, I think, tells a story. But it also is a dreadful reflection on society that, on average, women are subjected to 35 instances before they have the courage to report it. We simply cannot go on like that. We had a major piece of research done by University Campus Suffolk into domestic violence and the perceptions of victims just here in Suffolk. And frankly, the comments, the experiences of victims are pretty sickening, if not downright brutal and savage. When women have been strangled 4 or 5 times, recover and strangled again, it isn't funny. When they're asked to perform sex acts in front of their young children and pictures are put all over the internet, it beggars belief. And if we don't do something about that, it's pretty obvious to me children brought up in that atmosphere are highly likely to be the offenders of the future. And we all, every single one of us, has a responsibility to confront it. It's a disgraceful way to behave, but we've got to do something about it. So that's a top priority, and Gareth is leading some work for that on our behalf. Of course, it doesn't stop there. We were able to attract a lot of money in from the Ministry of Justice, people who've got mental health difficulties, young children. We do a lot for youngsters, especially from those from a disadvantaged background. Delighted we were able to put the money to roll out the cadets programme right across the county. That was going to be delayed for a year or two for some reason, I don't know why, but that isn't the case now. We opened a new unit in Sudbury last year, and on Monday we're going down to Hadleigh to open the next one. Really, really pleased with that. We've got plans in Milton Hall and the rest of Suffolk. A lot of the children who attend the cadets actually come from an underprivileged, deprived background, and it is astonishing to see the positive effect it can have on them, and therefore I think in the future as we move on. Commissioning and grants, we made a major change for that this year. We ring-fenced £700,000 of the budget to support the voluntary sector. There is no doubt in my mind there is some fantastic work done by the voluntary sector in Suffolk that will be a lot poorer as a county, and the way of life here will be frankly imperilled without the work they put in. I did want to mention the Special Constabulary and police volunteers at that time. Wonderful people who give their time for absolutely nothing, and frankly their commitment is second to none. And I know of the various meetings I've been to with specials, the full-time professional guys say we could not manage without them. And they cover a wide range of activities. It's not just about being in a uniform. You may have seen at the Suffolk show, for example, we launched a new initiative, Gareth and myself, volunteers on horseback. Very important out in the rural areas. There's quite a lot of interest in that already. Getting help in for professional services, cybercrime. That was another new unit we opened up in Halesworth on June the 1st. And that reflects the changing pattern of crime. It's innovative, but we have to recognise that there are so many more crimes now committed by using the internet. It could be financial fraud, child sexual exploitation, people trafficking, even domestic modern-day slavery. That happens here in Suffolk. Last year, I think I'm right in saying there were 12 convictions for modern-day slavery. It beggars belief, after all the issues of the old traditional slave trade, taking people from West Africa, that in a different form it still happens in modern-day society. Dreadful situation. You'll have seen the pictures of what happened to people in that container at Hadleigh at the end of last week. And we have to confront these things and deal with it, remembering that organised crime is very often behind it. We're very lucky in Suffolk to live in a low crime area and also have very few gangs and others or organised crime routes, but they are still here. It's reckoned to cost between 30 and 50 billion quid a year, organised crime in the whole of the UK. And whilst we're at the lowest level, we can't afford to be complacent. And that's why investing in technology, which Gareth will talk about later, automatic number plate recognition, new techniques, cyber detection and so on, we've got to get on top of these dreadful people and sort it out. So take those two together. And then lastly, this issue about preventing and reducing crime. Whilst one cannot say there is a direct link between poverty and levels of crime, it is also the case that where there is economic deprivation and people fall on hard times, it can lead to other problems. I'm particularly keen that in our procurement process we do a lot more to support the UK economy. And I think we have to look at the social and economic impact of what we buy. I've got no disrespect, of course, to the French or Germans or anyone else, but what I would say is, regardless of EU rules, they tend to support their economy far better than we do. And I'm frankly pretty fed up with hearing of rules and regulations and other artificial barriers that prevent us doing it, because I am absolutely convinced if you give people a purpose in life, and that doesn't mean employment, education, everything else, they are far likely to be better citizens of the future. And there's no good politicians sitting up there wringing their hands and running away from it. It's too damn comfortable for some people, and they need to understand that people at the bottom of the pile exist and what can we do collectively to try and support them. So there's that side of it. The other thing, of course, is working with the voluntary sector. How do you prevent crime in the first place? So huge scope there for joining services together right across the public sector. You look at community safety. The Safer Neighbourhood team concept is here to stay. Go back to what was originally said a few years ago. The Safer Neighbourhood concept was about the community. It wasn't just about policing. To me, it's absurd that we have a practitioner for the fire service advising on that. We have a practitioner from the constabulary advising on home and business security. You have trading standards advising on, should we say, internet security and so on. We could have one person who could do the whole lot. That would save a lot of money, provide a more effective service, and I think we could progress. So there's a lot of new ideas there as how we need to address the challenge of the budget, but overall I'm quite confident if we can all work together, and those in the leadership position, including myself and Gareth and any elected councillor from parish right up to county level MPs or whoever, if we have the will to put things together, overcome the difficulties, then I think we've got a pretty good future ahead of us. It's going to be damn hard, I accept that. It's not easy, but we simply have to do it. If we carry on with our silent mentality, we're going to get nowhere and we will all be impoverished. So working well together, frankly, is the key. We could do a huge amount. Suffolk is a fantastic county, and I've no doubt we will actually rise to the challenge if we possibly can. So, now for a more technical assessment, I'll hand over to Gareth. There we go.
Thanks, Tim. I'm probably going to cover a few things that Tim described earlier on, just in a little bit more detail, I guess from the operational perspective as well. But just to go through a few points. First of all, we'll look through these 4 bullet points here. I've put a bit of meat on the bone in relation to what the constabulary is here for and what we're actually going to do. Tim described how he holds me to account. That basically, he sets the police and crime plan. That is something that you all influence through your consultation with him. And then, once that's done, he does hold me to account at the bi-monthly accountability performance meetings, where we go through each of the objectives that's set for the constabulary, plus if there's an area that concerns him or that the people are raising habitually in relation to some of the issues that communities are facing, then Tim will pose questions to myself and the team. And I guess from the constabulary's point of view, it would be really good to see a lot more people there, seeing how that interaction takes place and just going through some of the things and some of the explanations we're going to give. Right, just starting off the challenges at the beginning. We've got £20.5 million to save over the next few years, as Tim has said. But we've actually found 3/4 of that already. We've identified where that is going to come from. And the work is now taking place on how we're going to find the additional money. We have already found a significant amount of savings, and we've done that through collaborative ventures in the Eastern region, and also with local authorities within Suffolk as well. But what we have done and what we are doing, and the emphasis of the work that we're going to do, is completely revolutionise the way that we are going to work. I think it's fair to say that as an organisation we've evolved into what we are today. So the way I best describe this is, that there have been so many different changes in society and technology. We have evolved into having to deal with motor vehicles, if you take it way back when. We've also had to evolve to deal with computing and computers as well, and the computer generation and the internet. But we have got into that position by some good work that's going on and some different ways of working. But now is a real opportunity for us to work as an organisation to actually make sure that we are able to completely change the way in which we work and provide our services. It's really interesting. One of the things that we have to try and deal with is the fact that demand on our services actually remains fairly consistent. You'll have seen over the past few years that crime has been going down. That's not just with the constabulary statistics, that's actually more broadly with surveys that are done anonymously through government departments as well. So they ask you questions, it's not the stuff that we collect. And that has shown, I guess, our traditional crimes, as we probably call them, the dust-ups outside nightclubs and pubs, those that are more visible on the streets, have been seeing a decline. We've had a change in crime type, but we've also had a change in the demand that's placed upon us. So a substantial amount of our work is actually looking at us as an organisation responding to people's calls for welfare, calls for assistance, something which is not a crime, but which requires the public sector to respond to. And it's usually the police that go there and deal with such incidents, and they've seen a very steep increase. So demand has stayed the same and crime is completely changing. And Tim alluded to this within his part of the presentation, where we looked at the fact that somebody can sit in their bedroom and be victim of a crime now, and actually somebody's much more likely to be sitting in their bedroom and be victim of a crime if they're on the internet than they are if they go out on the street and go out for a night out and have a drink. it's that dilemma that creates a big opportunity for us to change in the way that we are going to deliver our service. Because the police service still, in my view, is trying to deliver just the traditional type of service without revolutionising itself to deal with internet-based investigations, etc. So just giving you an example, we have looked and we've been looking as a team about how we deal with a lot of the work on Facebook, and have a substantial number of calls, and Danny will be able to back this up locally, where people who sit on Facebook get abused by people, get harassed by people, yet we still deal with it in a very traditional way. Yes, we have operators that go through it up at headquarters, but actually there are ways of being able to deal with this, which will be that online presence, that online ability for people to feel safe in the area they're actually surfing on the internet, and for us to be able to provide a decent quality service without reverting to the need to provide that traditional service that was in place before. Just moving on to the next bullet point now, just the organisation's development. One of the key things in terms of our change is that we are looking at something called evidence-based practice. People may have heard of this before within the medical profession. And we have seen that the medical profession, they revolutionised the way in which they worked by making sure there's a scientific basis for all of the work that they've done. You might sit there and say, actually that's really easy. If you're looking at a smallpox vaccine, you can have a group of people who use it on, you can have a group of people who don't use it on, and if people are getting better, then you know something's working. Well, actually we can actually lift that theory off of the medical profession and onto policing as well. And some work has been done to show how effective high visibility patrols are within either a nighttime economy or where there's been a spate of burglaries. And consistently, the work tells us that hitherto we'd have been spending perhaps 2 hours in a high visibility patrol there, but actually you're more effective if you're spending 10 minutes there and then moving on to the next place and providing 10 minutes at the next place as well. So you can see that 1 hour 50 minutes of your time could be classified as not being used effectively, and you could be using that elsewhere. So you can lift off the theory and you can work with it, and there's a wealth of academic work that we're dealing with within Suffolk, which will allow us to make sure we're doing the best possible policing with the staff that we have. We're also looking to reduce that demand. We've said traditional crime is going down, all crime is going down, but that demand on service is going up. And what's really important for us as an organisation is to make sure that we deal with things right at the very beginning, so it doesn't escalate. We've talked about domestic abuse as one of those. There are others as well, to make sure that we deal with those, and we'll deal with what's called that low-cost intervention to do problem solving right at the very beginning, rather than providing the really expensive high-cost emergency response that we have as well. And if we can reduce the amount of demand coming into our organisation, again, with those people that are there, present, policing, they can deal with things far, far more effectively. We've also got the ability to really innovate what we're going to be dealing with as well. Tim mentioned innovation within his slides. I'm going to concentrate on technical innovation because actually we've got some really, really good stuff that's being used. So for example, the ANPR, automatic number plate recognition system that we managed to get through a bid that was submitted through the OPCC's office, the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, to the Home Office, they provided us with a significant investment to make sure that our systems within Suffolk were the best they could possibly be. So we now have more cameras on the roads that look at the cars that are going through and automatically put them through a system to see if they're on any of our databases for intelligence about burglars, for example, so we know who's moving about, and that can be from anywhere in the whole country. We can have that on our database. It can be stolen vehicles, it can be people with no insurance. There's a wealth of information that's on there. But the bid that we had with the Home Office was to allow for the cameras, was to enable us to have decent, effective databases that are kept up to date, and also then have the ability to be able to dispatch an officer to the scene to deal with that particular hit on the computer. And those three elements are vitally important to make sure it works, and those three elements have all been put in place now. So rather than a police officer having to speak into their radio manually, having to get a check on cars as they go through, and literally somebody sitting there tapping it into a computer, it's automatically done with every vehicle that goes past that camera, and it flags up to the control room where there's an issue that needs to be dealt with. We've also got mobile working as well. Our computer systems are fantastic. We've got some really good systems, we've got some really innovation that's coming up in terms of a system which will take people through the reporting of crime, all the way through then into custody, and all the way through then into the criminal justice system. It is really, really good. Unfortunately, I mentioned earlier on about having to revolutionise the way in which we worked. Of course, what it's meant is that officers, PCSOs will come out and deal with an incident with yourselves. They'll then go back to the police station, sit on the computer and tap away on the computer to make sure that's all updated. Now that cannot be right. There was a few years ago there was an attempt to put mobile computer working in some of the vehicles. That didn't work particularly well. So what we've done is we've looked at it and we've now managed to get a system where the officers and staff are able to log on remotely and be able to deal with that. So now they don't have to go back to the police station, they're actually out in the community with yourselves, dealing with that all the time and being able to be seen, be visible and to deal with things effectively. I think finally, in terms of supporting the response to demands placed on the public sector, Tim alluded to it, there's a lot of work that we have within the public sector that is neither defined as policing or social services or education or health. We all have our little narrow lines which are definitely the stuff we have to deal with, but in between all of those lines there's a blurred there. There's a blurred who's responsible for what. Now it will serve nobody's purpose if one organisation sits there and says, well, it's not ours, it's yours, and the other organisation says, well, it's not ours, it's yours. Nobody gets dealt with, it doesn't get dealt with. And there's some really, really good work within the public sector within Suffolk that's looking at joining up all of these services. And there's a real commitment by not only the local authorities, but the constabulary, and then more broadly we're looking across engagement with health as well. And I've got real hope that that will provide a really decent service for our communities. We are really engaged with it and we're really happy to invest in it to make sure that we get the best for you within whichever part of Suffolk that you live in. Okay, that's it from me then.
I should have let no one else has used this, and I'm going to be brave and try 3 slides, so it's just going to go wrong. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Cooper. I'm the local police and commander for Baber. Now, what that means is essentially that I'm responsible for local policing in Baber. Just put that into context. I manage the staff in Baber, the daily running of issues here. If a problem comes up, crime series, for example, the constabulary would look to me to come up with the resources and the tactics to try and manage that problem so that we can put a stop to it. Now, again, just to put into context where I sit within the service, very briefly, I report back to Bury St Edmunds, because we're a western area here, Superintendent, Chief Inspector, and my staff that I manage consist of 3 safer neighbourhood teams, being Baber West, which is the rural part of Sudbury generally, and Sudbury and Cornard, and Baber East, which again is where we sit here. And those teams are the ones that consist of the PCSOs, the sergeants, and the PCs. I also have responsibility for 5 response teams that are split between the 2 stations of Hadleigh and Sudbury, but also provide coverage for cable, and they provide that 24-hour emergency response. So just to give you an idea of the resources I'm directly responsible for. But don't forget, in addition, we have those that I don't have ownership of, but are still patrolling the areas like Hadleigh and all of Baber, the firearms units, the roads policing units, dogs, and as far as I mentioned, special constables. We have our own team here. We've got some excellent volunteers around CCTV that sit in Suffolk Police Station, doing a wonderful job every weekend. So just gives you an idea of the other resources available. So just moving on to these slides here. Just going to start from, I'm not going to go too deep in performance. I know some people don't like statistics and things, so it's very much sort of some headline figures here. Overall, we do continue to see that reduction in crime, as has already been pointed out. I think the only exception to that is around serious sexual offences, and some of the explanations around that have been given. And we are dedicating teams and putting resources into trying to solve those problems. As it's been mentioned already, crime's changing. But locally, these are just some of the headlines here. Antisocial behaviour, this is for Labour. There's a significant reduction in reported antisocial behaviour. Now, I'm not saying that antisocial behaviour still doesn't exist. It's 37%, so there's still a significant amount that does still take place. However, I'm proud of that. I think that's a really good achievement, and I put it down to the methods that we use to try and tackle antisocial behaviour. We used to go out, and the response car would go, stick a plaster on it for the night, and then they'd probably get called back the next day because they haven't dug deep into that problem. Nowadays, through these safety neighbourhood teams, through partnership working, we go really deep into the problem, and it's normally the same people that cause the most problems. We have a list of frequent problem people, through our statistics and things, and they're the ones we work with now and try and reduce that. Violence of injury, very slight reduction, and I'll say this for all the crime categories really, there are some slight increases, some slight reductions. So, violence of injury, 3 less over a year, we're talking around 350 crimes there for violence of injury for Baber. The thing that I can point out is alcohol-fueled violence is reducing, so that's had quite a significant reduction. And that has allowed us locally to look at the way we police the nighttime economy, which is hopefully going to release some resources, because traditionally we have been stood outside nightclubs and pubs almost waiting for problems because they were so common. But as we've seen a reduction in that, my resources are now briefed to spread out a bit and maybe check the routes home for people to make sure they're safe. There's some damage on the way down if people want to kick wing mirrors and things like that. House burglary, up 6%, an increase of 9 offences. And on the next slide I'm going to come on to that and try and explain what happened there around burglaries and the series that we had. But I am well aware, and I know my bosses are as well, of the impact of dwelling burglary, house burglary has on not only the victim, but also the wider community, because people hear that there's burglaries going on, people feel unsafe. So we dedicate a lot of resources, and indeed this currency, in fact I'll go on to that now, we dedicated a lot of resources, and it became a force priority for us for the new police and of course CRD. Domestic burglary then. In November 2014, a series emerged of house burglaries. Locally, it was mainly in our rural areas as opposed to Hadleigh Town or Suffolk Town. The method used for the crime was very bullshit, or saying people would knock on the door and say, "Oh, if you hear any noise next door, don't worry, we're working here," and they'd go on and smash a window and escape with jury. And one weekend alone in Tattingstone area, we had 11 burglaries, and that series sort of spread across the west of the county. Now, I'm pleased to say it took a few months because a lot of resources were put into it, but we have made several arrests in relation to that now. One in Holton, St Mary, a man was arrested and charged. And for the Tattingstone ones and those wider in West Suffolk, there's a group that are from out of county that are coming out on bail for those matters. And I can report, as I speak now, we are seeing a reduction again in those burglary offences. They have stopped. But I'm not complacent, and if we get any reports again, we'll put those resources straight back in locally to tackle it. Hadleigh sexual offences. Now, I think it's important to mention this. I'm a Hadleigh resident, so I know very much about these, and we were battling at the time with social media to try and get the facts out there. We had 3 serious sexual offences reported in Hadleigh. The first one was New Year's Eve in 2014, and 2 very close proximity in March, and when I say close proximity, I'm talking about the date, about a week, 10 days apart. And links were made to those offences. Now, what I can report, each one was recorded and investigated by very competent teams from headquarters. That wasn't a local investigation. We are certain those crimes were not linked, despite some of the reports that went out on social media and so on. Still terrible crimes, and we're investigating them individually. For the third offence, a man was arrested, and we're still investigating the other 2. But the message tonight is that they are not linked, and I just wanted to put that message out there because there were some other things in social media. Finally, around local issues here is road safety. Probably one of the most consistent complaints that I hear about, and through the priority setting meetings that my officers attend, is road safety complaints, speeding cars, parking. We have a proportionate response to that, and I have to manage my resources to tackle that in line with the other crimes that are taking place. But every 3 months I chair a group in Suffolk Police Station, the Road Safety Management Group, and I sit down, we have Suffolk County Council in and the Safe Neighbourhood teams, and we talk about the priority areas. We collate all that information where the problems are for speeding cars, etc., and we talk it through and see how we can work together to solve it. We're not going to solve the problem of speeding, but how we can improve it. It's going to take a lot of time to actually solve it. We use Speedwatch, Community Speedwatch, which is a really, really good scheme, where volunteers actually go out with a speed device, and it's shown to work. People slow down. They don't know who they are. They think they might be police. They think they might get a ticket. Ultimately, what we do, they record the registration number of the speeding car, feed it to the Safe Neighbourhood team, initially a letter to the driver. And it really does have an impact. I've seen some signs around Hadleigh actually saying this is a speedwatch area. So if anyone from parish councils or anywhere else haven't got a scheme like that, please get in touch with the Safe Neighbourhood team. And I really do encourage those schemes to be implemented. Just a couple of, this is just some things that have been going on in the local area. I thought I'd share with you just a couple of stories. Hadleigh Drug Factory. This is down to the Safe Neighbourhood team in Baber East in Hadleigh Police Station. PCSO started to get intelligence through, just from walking around Hadleigh, about possible drug activity on the Lady Lane Industrial Estate in one of the units there. And they worked for a good week or so, speaking to people and just building up that intelligence. They spoke to response colleagues, and one night they were out patrolling that area, and they ended up arresting the 2 men coming out of the actual unit. And when they went inside, they uncovered a huge cannabis factory, lots of plants, which is quite surprising for Hadleigh. As a resident, I've said already, you just don't think that sort of thing goes on, but it just shows that it does. But 4 people so far have been arrested, and we've got others that we are still searching for at the moment. It's still a live case. But just as a sign of how important it is to just give that information to the PCSOs and the SNT, Safe Neighbourhood team, if you do come across it. These are the Safe Neighbourhood team SNT priorities at the moment. We have a priority setting meeting each month in each of the 3 areas within Baber. And these are the sorts of things we're tackling at the moment, what the teams are. Crime reduction visits linked to shed and garage burglary. This time of year we do see an increase in that sort of crime because people tend to steal things, people have much more tools around and believe they go to boot sales, and we do work with boot sales in places like that, trying to track down stolen goods. So advice there. Some antisocial behaviour around shops, a case in Sudbury, a parade of shops there, and indeed in Capel St Mary, we've had some issues with working on. Pinewood vehicle crime, very close to Ipswich, as you will know, Pinewood. And we do get a lot of people coming out of Ipswich and committing crimes in that Pinewood area, which is still covered by Baber. So we're doing work around that, plainclothes work, crime reduction work, and things to tackle those problems. Benton Street in Hadleigh. Anyone that lives here or drives through regularly will know about Benton Street. Real difficult one to solve. I know people locally are very passionate about it, and we are doing enforcement down there with lorries and people on footpaths, but I do firmly believe that needs to be designed out, and again, I know Suffolk County Council are working on that with residents of Benton Street and beyond, but we will keep an eye on that. This again is about working in the area. Road safety, I've mentioned road safety already, but we'll continue to give that proportionate response we can for the Safe Neighbourhood teams. But that's one of the areas I probably struggle with most, to balance resources for road safety around speeding and parking, in line with other crimes as well. I know we're one of the few counties left that actually still deals with parking, and other areas have decriminalised it, which means a local authority takes responsibility for it. So that's maybe one for the future for here. Final very quick story I want to tell you about is again the Safe Neighbourhood team. Scrap metal dealers, you sometimes see them going around in the vehicles with all the scrap metal piled up. They were going down driveways and just helping themselves to bikes and things. They, yeah, we've got permission, it's absolutely fine. Safe Neighbourhood team did a little operation and they stopped 2 different groups and arrests were made, 2 men were charged, and we're also working with the council around the licensing offence as well, because they need to be registered to do that. So it's just an example of some good local work that's been going on. Okay, so that's it from me, just a little local perspective on policing, and thanks for listening.
Right, thanks, Danny. Right, so that's it, ladies and gentlemen. So it's now over to you. I just wanted to make you aware that all the desks as you came in, I hope everybody will be able to leave us with your contact details. And if you want to get in touch with me at any time, I've got my cards out here with my mobile link, so please feel free to take that. And there's some other information there as well. And I'm now going to see the note turn it off, so I can get that. So now it's over to you for any questions you'd like to ask. So,
Right, question about drones.
drones, yep.
They're being used by criminals, they're being used by certain organisations concerned with the countryside, etc., in Suffolk,
Yep.
to inspect areas where it's not safe to put a helicopter over. Basically, I understand that we've got some rather exorbitant costs with the police helicopter because we're committed to certain expenses with that. But drones seem to be the future, and they're a lot cheaper, and they don't involve human lives up there in the air. I mean, you'll know about that tragedy in Glasgow, which you're
Quite, yes.
So it's really innovation, and can you get a grant from the Home Office to start trying this?
Right, well, that's a very good question. It's actually very timely. Gareth and I did actually visit the base at Watersham last Thursday evening, in fact, to hear what was going on. And just in case other people aren't quite sure of the situation, there was a deal agreed before I was elected and before Gareth was on the scene for the National Police Air Service. It was mandated, and unfortunately it means we get a lousy deal through NPAS. We have to pay £800,000 of yours and my money for the hours used by the helicopter, and we are paying £400,000 for nothing because we're only using half of the hours that are there. Now that is not a sensible use of resources. As far as I'm concerned, it's unacceptable. I'm not prepared to spend that money for nothing. £400,000 is the equivalent, if you like, to 8 police officers. So one of your roles as PCC is to make sure you have an efficient and effective police force. That clearly doesn't fit with that. Now, we are in the middle of discussions with NPAS. It's not a very well-run organisation, I have to say. There are all sorts of anomalies in there. For example, Norfolk pay far less than us for the same number of hours. Well, that's unacceptable. Not a slur against Norfolk, even if they are just up the road. But it is heavily biased in favour of the metropolitan areas. And I'm pretty sick and tired of rural areas, particularly Suffolk, being short-changed. If they want extra hours in the metropolitan areas, they should jolly well pay for it. So we are in the middle of this situation coming to negotiations. We are making some progress, but we have not finalised it yet because we still aren't there. And one of the things that I think is really important, we need to look at what are the operational requirements, so that's obviously down to Gareth. My own view is that drones have a role to play. They are not a helicopter, but there are certain situations where it may well work. As you say, I happen to know with my cultural background, we can survey fields and all sorts of other things, very, very useful. Equally, as you say, it is an opportunity for criminals to use them, which they are doing, so we need to see how we can do that. And I think one of the other things we should be looking at, which we did discuss last Thursday evening, what are the options for having a shared emergency services helicopter resource, including for the coast and so on. Different piece of kit, but that's the sort of thing we need to look at, so we look at options before we make any final decisions. So, number one, NPAS has got a sharpen its pencil at least twice more, because we're not putting up the deal we've got at the moment. Number two, I think drones do have a role. I think it was Sussex Police got a grant under the Innovation Fund for looking at what the operational requirements are there. So if we genuinely innovate and look at what can be done, I'm sure we will get some assistance from the government. And then, of course, the next thing is what else could we do? Other countries, I believe, do share helicopters like that. But Gareth, I expect you probably have an operation on that.
I guess just with the drones, I agree with Tim, there is a place for them. And as technology develops, so our use of drones will develop as well. So for example, at the moment, we place heavy reliance on our helicopter if there's a vehicle failing to stop. Well, with technology as it is at the moment, we are not capable of having a drone that would follow for some distance. So you still need to have some sort of airframe to be able to deal with that. On the positive side of it, I guess, in in respect of drones, thermal imaging is one thing that we use the helicopter for quite a lot. But my understanding is that thermal imaging is now available commercially, not just the military, but commercially, that may start to develop into something that we're looking at. So, yes, as an organisation nationally, or as organisations nationally, policing is looking at drones. Not only have we got Sussex that have been given the Innovation Fund bid, but we've also got officers from Kent that are looking at how best they can be used with police.
So, watch this space. Lady over there, thank you.
Some months ago, just a year ago, when I was just able to come to our parish council meetings, the local officer mentioned that there was a difficulty in particular in the Baker area where speed limit signs were either obscured or too faint, or for whatever reason it was difficult to bring prosecutions for speeding because the signs weren't in the right place, where it faded or obscured or whatever. And that the force were putting together a list of all the ones that were a problem, and I think that we weren't doing as many speeding checks at the time. I certainly haven't seen you at the bottom of Grantham Hill for some months. I just wondered whether that piece of research into road signs was complete, whether you can do speeding enforcement again, or whether it's still suspended.
Yeah, I've been in post about a year, and I wasn't aware of that. However, I would say for the road safety management group that I spoke of during the presentation, that's the sort of thing we should be able to easily address, because we've got Suffolk County Council there. And I think this time of year, especially as the bushes all grow over, don't they, and this is when they need to be on guard for that really. But yeah, I would say that's quite a small number of cases that would preclude us from doing speed enforcement. But as again, I said in the presentation, we are relying more and more on Community Speed Watch to do those kind of tasks as we focus more on other priorities. We can still do it, we still have the van that goes out and for specific areas of high risk and danger.
I think it may have been, there might have been a court case where somebody's defence solicitor was one of these people who are hired to get more speeding charges. And they had said, this sign was a few metres away from where it should be, or the distance between them wasn't correct. And as I understood it, the whole thing was then being examined to see if all the signs were in the right, 30-mile limit signs were in the right places, in the right distance from each other, and weren't too faint to be seen in sunlight, or whatever other things these super defence lawyers can come up with too.
Okay, well I confess I wasn't aware of that, and I've not had it reported to me as an issue in the last year. Suffolk County haven't mentioned it either, and okay, there will always be someone who will take it to the nth degree to try and get out of trouble, but I think generally the signs are adequate. When they're put in, they are put in according to rules, traffic orders and things. But if there's any examples that we do come across, for example, someone challenged a case, we would really quickly rectify that with Suffolk
I think
County.
the officer who came to our meeting suggested that Tattingstone might be a particular problem.
Right, okay.
Do you want to add anything?
I just guess Tim may talk in relation to some work that they did in terms of the survey of speeding, but the process is really, really clear now. We will address issues that come up either because there are real problems because of crashes that involve either people being killed or seriously injured, or if there's community concern in relation to it. And with the community concern, you feed it to the Safe Neighbourhood team. The Safe Neighbourhood team is the first group of staff that will deal with it. It can then get escalated through to roads policing officers, and we can do some work then around the strips that get laid out to make sure we know exactly what's going on from a technical point of view. And then finally, we can put the van up there if it becomes an issue that cannot be addressed. I think the point that Danny makes is, and we've discussed it a few times now, Community Speed Watch is really, really effective. Now, we will do things when we can do things, and we do stuff when there's an interaction that says it's a real problem for you. But Community Speed Watch works. And Community Speed Watch is vital to enable that sort of like that visible deterrence from the people in the village or town themselves, and then obviously the information getting fed through to be dealt with. So, a few messages there, but we still deal with it as a priority, because at the end of the day, if there are issues around speeding, then there can be issues around people losing their life, and that's something that we do address as a constabulary.
Yes, it was just a suggestion from the force that they were particularly looking at all the different 30-mile limit signs to see whether they're in the right places or too faint?
I must say I've not heard of that myself. I'm aware of some other issues, particularly around parking and the signage around parking, which is being addressed with the county council, but I've not heard specifically around that. I wonder if it might be isolated, that might have been that one area, and then people were doing a bit of a review. But certainly, I would have heard about it if people are sitting there saying, this is a real problem, we can't do people for speeding, and we are still doing people for speeding.
Yes, it seemed to be maybe a Labour East or Labour issue from what the officer told on meeting.
If you leave your details afterwards, Danny can take it whenever bit for you.
There is a website called Fix My Street in Suffolk where you can report potholes or damage to road signs, that sort of thing. So if signs are being obscured by foliage, I think you can report those sort of things on there, and it's down to the highways agency and the council to resolve those matters. I know that's not the issue of speed.
Highways, the Suffolk County Council website, you can report one there, I've done it.
Yeah,
And
there are at least 2 websites.
Yeah. I mean, if you're still getting problems, by all means, drop me a line, because I know James Phipps, a new portfolio holder for highways. I actually met him this afternoon, and I know he's determined to sort this sort of nonsense out where it happens, because there have been too many instances where people have reported it in good faith, and then it seems to take weeks to deal with it. But no, I mean, we need to get these issues addressed. So hopefully, as you say, that's an isolated incident. But if you're not satisfied, drop us a line, and we'll certainly take it forward for you. Can I just mention something about parking, ladies and gentlemen, because I think one of the things, and Danny actually mentioned this, Suffolk is one of the few counties where, apart from the borough of Ipswich, the police are responsible for parking enforcement. Now, I'm a district councillor, I was leading with Suffolk for 8 years. We did not at the time get enough support from other districts and boroughs to actually do civil parking enforcement, in other words, when it's decriminalised. I think we need to look at that again, because if we could end up with a joint approach right across Suffolk for 1 or 2 teams to do parking enforcement, it would take a bit of pressure off police time, and I think you as residents and businesses can get a better service as a result. So I think we need to look at this in a sensible way. How can we pool our resources to take that forward? I think I'm right in saying 85% of England and Wales is covered by civil parking enforcement. It's a very small area, and Suffolk is one of the very few counties where this still goes on. So you need to hold us politicians and politicos to account and say, come on guys, go and get it sorted.
Can I just make a comment?
Of course.
I'm conscious that went down that route some years ago,
Yeah.
because they've got existing car park attendants in the multi-stories. And they then went to civilianisation of on-street parking. And they more than covered the costs because of that. So really, I know you can go along and you can talk to district councils about doing this, but the time may come that you really want to make a decision and say, look, really, we're not going to do this anymore. You have to take responsibility. You can cover the costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I think that's a very good point, and that's the sort of way we need to do it. I'll come to this gentleman here, I think. But did you want to ask a question? No, I'll come back.
Going back to parking, I was school term, I live in Cotton Gardens. There are times where you couldn't get a fine to an ambulance down in Cotton Gardens at all. Someone's going to die before you can get it done.
Well, I think that's very important.
Sorry, is that around the primary school?
You can station on the school, you go to Cotton Gardens, it's no way you can get a fine to an ambulance down through that gap. Not a chance in hell.
And does that expand outside of school hours, or is it for that half hour?
But it's basic doing the school term.
Yeah.
There's no way you can get an ambulance or fine through that place.
Okay, well, that's really useful to hear then. John, you had a question.
Well, 2 points really. Firstly, on the issue of civil parking, it took Ipswich 5 years to break even on their costs. And I think with the financial restraints that most district councils have got at the moment, they'll be a little bit cautious about wanting to commit expenditure in that direction at the moment. But the main point I wanted to bring up was weight restrictions. Who's actually responsible for them now? Because Suffolk County Council seem to think it's not them. The police seem to think it's not them. Who is actually responsible for it? Because we've had major problems on the B1070 through East Berkholt, whilst notorious roadworks have been going on in the A12. Because every time they close the A12, they route all the Arctics down a weight-restricted road. And then you've got 40-foot Arctics going down an 18-ton weight limit road. That's equivalent to sending it down Benjamin Street.
We are responsible for enforcement of weight restrictions, and I touched on Benton Street itself and the enforcement we're doing. But like I said, I believe it needs to be designed out. And I know when the roadworks took place, my sergeant from the Safe Neighbourhood team did attend a consultation meeting with the workers, and these sorts of issues were raised. And we knew that there would be some problems, and we have had resources up there looking at the lorries, you know, if they are breaching it. To all of our surprise, these roadworks have gone on a lot longer than expected. So that's probably prolonged the problem for you with the roadworks going on. But to answer the question, we are responsible for enforcement of rules. But like I see with Benton Street, that won't solve it. People will still be cheeky and go down the same they do. Some people still use their phone and they still won't wear their seatbelt. So I do firmly believe that designing it out is the best way. But yeah, we are responsible.
But the B1070 and the roadworks, the consultation said that there will be gatekeepers on duty when the diversions were in place to stop oversized vehicles coming through. They still came through, and on one occasion they closed the northbound A12 and forgot to put out any signs telling the traffic where to go.
Right.
And he ended up tootling down Gaston Street through the middle of East Burcock. The first one you heard of it was when a convoy of 40-foot artists came trundling through the village because they'd forgotten to put out the signs. As it turned out, they didn't need to close the northbound carriageway anyway. There was a mix-up in communications between highways idiots and their contractors.
And you've nailed on head there as far as whose responsibility that would be around roadworks, that's different. But it's just that ongoing enforcement. You know, I can't put an officer down there all the time. We can hit it at certain times. There will be someone who slips through when we're not there. It's one of the problems we face with that sort of work, road traffic work.
What I would also do is just, Highways England are a difficult bunch of people to deal with. We do, and that's an understatement. They're not straightforward, and I wish they would have been more open, and should we say, give a much more candid assessment of what they're saying. They're trying to mislead people, but I'll leave it at that. But I've got a meeting coming up with their regional people, I think in the middle of July, so I'll certainly take it up. I mean, that's just incompetent and daft, isn't it? It's not acceptable.
The interesting point is there's an organisation called Transport Focus, which is the watchdog that's supposed to keep an eye on Highways England and the Department of Transport. And it's supposed to report back with recommendations which are published openly to do it. They've all signed up to an agreement where Transport Focus will be their watchdog. It's supposed to represent road users and passengers' interests. Might be worth talking to them.
It might. You want to
Well, not the weight restriction. In relation to civil enforcement, I just think, we've heard of one borough in a different county that was okay and broke even, but the costs in fact more than the same. And we've heard of one within Suffolk that had issues. I think our view as an organisation is that there will be a business model which will be effective for everybody, and that may involve some collaboration between different boroughs, but actually they can provide a really effective response to parking, more responsive to parking issues to be able to deal with it, and that would then free up the time of the PCSOs and officers to be dealing with other issues that are there as well. It needs to be effective, it really does need to be effective, but actually I'm sure there's a business model which we can actually ask people to look at, which will allow that to take place.
Alan, you've obviously got some great things.
Well, it's a similar brace of points, I'm afraid. In response to that, I really hope so. If Ipswich has taken 5 years to break even, it's commonly understood that it's much harder in rural areas to do that. And of course, Suffolk has a much greater proportion of rural areas to metropolitan type areas. So I fear for this whole debate. If there isn't a model somewhere that can make it work, as a district council, I haven't seen that yet. But could I be assured that you're at the devolution table, the discussions that they're carrying on at the moment, because somebody has to pay for this somewhere. It is actually only one public estate. You would only be shunting the costs onto a different proportion of taxpayers. And there should be a solution in the devolution debate, but you need to be at the table to make sure that it's being discussed. On the other point that the gentleman makes to me raised, and something I haven't heard quite yet tonight, how closely do you work with your colleagues in Essex because it is only just down the road. It's particularly relevant, I'm afraid, to these road-related items, but they would be police enforcement items unless we can move enforcement somewhere else as well. Problems that we cause put traffic on their side. We talked about it the other way around. When we've got an incident here, that your manager had an incident or roadworks, how do you get cooperation out of Essex? Because I've got a current example where Essex just don't want to know, we're about to cause a problem in Suffolk, and Essex police won't even respond, and Essex County won't even respond. And yet they're about to get the problem. How can you work more closely with them?
Well, I'll let Gareth answer that first, but I can certainly be in touch with the PCC in Essex, so I know well. But Gareth, I think you the first go.
I guess two issues you're right. One devolution. We're absolutely at the table, both PCC's office and the constabulary as well. And one thing I will say is we're not an organisation that palms off problems to somebody else without identifying a solution. We're somebody that wants to sit down and identify a solution so people can actually go and do it. So you're not going to find that from us. On the second point, tactically we work really, really well with Essex. We've had an operation in the last couple of weeks which was a multi-force operation. The three leads that are in the Eastern region, chief inspectors that work on roads policing, frequently meet to make sure that they are really joined up and delivering the service that they deliver. It sounds to me like, I don't know what the issue is that you're facing. What I would say is we've got a really good link in with them. If you've got something that you're not getting, the message is just not getting through, if you let us know what that issue is, we can make sure that Chris Spinks, who's our traffic chief inspector, can speak to that person within Essex that he currently has a really good relationship with. Great.
Thank you. I think the thing on that wider community safety review, which is a part of the devolution process, it is about pooling resources and working for the common good. You're absolutely right, we've spoken about it before. It's all public money, it doesn't belong to you and me, it belongs to all of us. And frankly, the public, in my view, want a dose of common sense. Forget these silly little turf wars. What is there for the greater good about making Suffolk better and safer? And I know we are as well on that, and I know you think exactly the same. So I reckon we'll have to take that forward and bang a few heads together if necessary. So we're on the case, I can assure you. Anybody else? So,
very quickly, I chair the Cape Town District Neighbourhood Watch cluster meetings. We keep hearing rumours that the police may not be able to attend. Our view is that it's pointless having these meetings unless there's a police presence. It's only once every 4 months and it doesn't go on for more than an hour. So, can I ask you to make sure that we do, because really, if the police aren't there, it's pointless. We can't solve our problems ourselves, can we?
I will bring in Gareth. I just want to make one comment about this, first of all. That happens in my district council practice. I think it's come up at most public meetings, business attendance, or could I put it another way, good engagement. Now, from where I sit, sometimes it isn't possible for someone to go to a meeting, but at least you should get a report before the meeting, not afterwards. That isn't acceptable unless there's some particular reason. And I do think, particularly in rural areas, that does come up as an issue. I know we've spoken about that before, and that's why these meetings are really, really useful. We have to engage. The work that you do there is absolutely vital. It's really, really important. So, Gareth, what are we going to do about this?
I mean, it is important that we do engage. We have to balance attendance at meetings with every other thing that we have on, because there's so much good work going on in Suffolk. It generates its own sort of like meeting structure because you've got them, but it's really important that we do have that interaction between neighbourhood watch, parish councils, district councils, however it is, we need to make sure we've got that there. My personal view is where possible we should have face-to-face attendance. I think it's important. You'll see the interaction we've got tonight, and you can't really do that in a letter, in a telephone call. It really does need to be that engagement. At the end of the day, we're here to service the needs of the community. And if we don't understand what the issues are of the community, then it's very difficult for us to be able to provide a service. Like I say, where we can. We were at a meeting the other day and the inspector wasn't aware that somebody had taken it off of their own back to turn around and say, actually I'm not attending your meetings, and very quickly they were in attendance again. So I guess if you're not getting attendance, and I would want to see it, particularly at your group, I would just tap into Danny and just have a chat. But it is important, really important.
Can I just ask, how big is that cluster meeting? How big an area do you cover for that particular cluster meeting? how many villages?
Pinewood, cables from early, Stratton early, East Turbo, cables.
Yeah.
It's quite a wide area.
Yeah.
So yeah, once every 4 months. It's not as if having to do it weekly or turn up. It's just they're not long. So
Yeah, they're the ones, the instruction I have given as well, is that where we can, we should go to those cluster ones, but it's the smaller meetings is sometimes the problem that, we've got so many parishes in Labour, and just to spread the staff so thinly with PCSOs, so that's an issue. But I agree, 4 months, one cluster to meet so many people should be achievable.
all right, thank you.
Thanks for raising it. Anybody else got anything? Sir?
You mentioned earlier about joining up police stations, fire stations and things like that. Obviously there's a lot of big police stations in Suffolk, years and years old, that obviously underused and things like that. If you manage to shift one of those police stations onto the open market and gets on there, do you get the money from that state? So if you sell a plot of land with an old police station for £1 million, you actually get that.
Yeah, and that's one of the differences between local authorities. We are not subject to the same rules. That money comes straight back into the police budget.
Yeah.
So, for example, the one up at we actually got out on planning permission. They weren't originally going to do that for some reason, but I insist they did that. And I think, if I remember correctly, got somewhere about 470,000 quid for that. The one at Woodbridge, and now we've got the joint fire station there, and I think we got just over 700,000 for that. So that money comes straight back into the constabulary budget. The government doesn't suck it back out of the system or anything like that at all.
There's a lot of big old police stations.
I can't entirely agree. They are worth a lot of money, they're all good sites, and we are about to start a proper in-depth estates review, along with the budget process, along with community safety review and public access, because I think in the past these things have been done separately. Well, that's a bonkers way to do it. You need to look at the way policing model is changing, impacts of crime are changing, and put it all together. And that's what I meant earlier by saying we have to be more business-like. So, looking at the estate, which is worth over 30 million quid, never mind the PICs, that's a separate issue, but that's roughly what the estate across Suffolk is worth. That's a lot of money, and I would suggest that over the next few years you could probably realise, maybe, just as an estimate, I've got the evidence for that, perhaps a third of the value of that, potentially. So we need to look at everything, look at the property transactions, what can be done, what are the alternatives. It's still very much about keeping a police presence in the area. We're coming up, we're going to see, for example, Clare Town Council, I think next month, we've come up with a solution for there. And that was in response to a public meeting. So we've got to work with the public to get that right. We need to maximise the amount of money we can get into the constabulary, of course, make sure the buildings are efficient and effective. So there's a whole mixed process. For example, Landmark House near Astor in Ipswich, that's owned jointly with the County Council ourselves. Up at near where I live, we've got a police station, safe and able to actually based in the grounds of the hospital. We're looking, I hope we're successful, in Southwold, for example, working with the voluntary sector, Adams and the others. There's a possibility, haven't got there quite yet, about a new police station based in a redundant property that Adams have got. Saxmundham is another example.
There's a lot of big police stations with a lot of ground.
Absolutely.
Which is worth a lot of money.
Stone Market we're looking at. We will be looking at Sudbury to find out what the best way. So we're going to look at everything, I assure you, without question.
If you look here, Hadleigh with a nice big car park, back there, you think you get a care home on that, couldn't you? And build a much better Haywood.
Yeah, I agree. And that's
next to the fire station.
And I think the other thing about this is the way we've been really good at getting money from central government. The one in Woodbridge, for example, we got a 60% grant for that. Plus we kept all the capital seats. We actually made money out of doing that. So that's the sort of thing we need to do, and I'm sure you're right behind doing all that.
But when you look to place them, do they necessarily need to be on the high street? Because police stations are not police stations anymore, are they?
My view, this is a personal view, and that's why we want to look at this properly. There's this issue about public access, use of technology, looking at crime. We can't always be having someone sitting at a front desk for 12 hours a day with 3 people coming to see them. We do need...
Hadleigh is open 6 hours a week.
Yeah. But then, of course, the needs of the building are completely different.
Yeah.
That's where I think you could have one person who could be, I don't know, public straight voluntary sector desk. They've done it in other parts of the country. Have one person, citizens advice, local authorities, all sorts of things in one. Even 1 or 2 places try having it in the back of a supermarket because they are open 7 days a week. Why not? If it's the information. So we've got to look at all the options, and we'll definitely do it.
Yeah, we are. and that's why Tim says that public access is linked up to the estates review as well. We work more broadly across the public sector. And it's really interesting because the only bit I want to add is around innovation. We have had difficulty before trying to find partners that will provide a policing front office, if you see what I mean. So, so we've got a multi-agency person dealing with that. And one of the issues has been around the fact that they don't really want to deal with people that are coming in on bail, who have been sort of like charged with particular offences, and they find it really difficult if they're not within the police environment to be able to deal with that. The only reason I mention it is because actually one of the Innovation Fund bids this year is for the trial of a digital system where the person goes into a booth, doesn't even interact with the person behind there, puts their fingerprint on the scanner, looks at the screen, and it confirms that you are that person signing on bail. So with technology as it is, actually it makes things much, much easier to try and negotiate.
Yeah. So we look at a way to reassure public confidence that yes, there is a presence there.
But with reduction of number of officers now, you don't need as much brain for an officer. I mean, one of those police stations built with a lot of top brass inside.
Yeah.
Now you're lucky if you've got a police inside.
Yeah.
But that whole review is in there. There's been partial reviews, but there's a new review that's looking at absolutely all of the buildings. And actually,
we are getting money for absolutely sure we're there. Yeah. Now the pound notes stay in Suffolk. They're not going anywhere else. They're not going up the road either, so don't worry about that. No. Good. But that's a very important question. John.
Yes, sorry. Following on from what Hadleigh mentioned about decriminalisation of parking, I wonder if, I know you're coming to come up with something in the autumn where you tell us what's going to go on. Is decriminalisation part of your strategic plan to save that, the 15 million you've identified so far? Because I know Suffolk County Council told me personally a year ago that was the plan to help you guys out with your budgets.
There was a discussion with public sector leaders that never got concluded, but I'm hoping with the change of leadership we might actually make some progress this year. So the answer, certainly as far as I'm concerned, is yes. We've actually got 2 days looking at strategic planning tomorrow and Friday, so it's a very timely question. But it is, if we could work together and you could have, I don't know, 1 or 2 teams to cover the whole of Suffolk so that it actually got the money in so it didn't cost districts and boroughs anything, actually made a bit, that's the sort of model we've got to work at, because districts have had bigger budget cuts than the police actually, and they've still managed to hold their head above water. So we've got to work together for this, and I'm sure we can do that. We've got complete confidence if we can get just the right model. But it's a good point.
But demand reduction is absolutely the core. You know, if we reduce what's coming into the organisation to be able to deal with, and that's not just shutting doors completely, as I say, that's providing, trying to get solutions. You know, this is why it's so important. That last bit of my bullet point was the public sector working together more effectively. You know, we don't want duplication and we don't want palming off between different agencies. It just wouldn't work.
Can I ask another one on regarding merging of blue light services? Last year, at some of these meetings, you mentioned the apparent lack of cooperation from the ambulance service to merge. Is that still the case this year, or are they?
There is some low-level cooperation, but I think it's well known that our I suppose our chief executive doesn't think there's any scope for that. Well, I think that's wrong. I think you should at least look at the options. I don't see how you can make a decision without looking at the options available. And he has, as far as I'm aware, refused to do that, or perhaps that's where a bit of government pressure might help. Because there are occasions where I think that could work very, very well. But we need to look at the options to make sure you continue with the day job whilst you're looking at other alternatives. And that's quite a big challenge as well, but it should certainly be looked at.
Thank you.
In Scotland, we'll talk about them too much. One of the laws they want to change is to have a one witness situation where you need 2 people to process something. Is it, am I talking nonsense, or is that?
Not at all. It's a different law. It's a different law in Scotland. They do have to have corroboration. Now, quite clearly, it's something we always aspire to. We don't have the same rules in relation to that. So, you know, a police officer that stands up will stand up and give evidence based upon them as an individual, and will be tested in court in relation to what they have seen. Quite clearly, it's always better if you get 2 people, but we're not bound by the same rules as Scottish.
Interesting point. That's one that's never come up before, so I'll go back in the back of here and see if I can plonk it in.
All the cameras.
What about the
Yeah, all cameras are fantastic. 2 reasons. One is you get some really good evidence from them. You know, what people first say, what people's initial interaction is. In addition to that, there's the byproduct of it, less complaints, because actually it's there, it's tangible evidence about what happened in the interaction. Could be because it's controlling the officer's behaviour, or it could be because somebody won't be likely to make a malicious complaint. And the other is because body-worn videos on as well clearly would have an impact on our sickness rates, because actually people are far less likely to assault a police officer if they've got a camera pointing at them as well. It's really good. There's so much innovation going on at the moment. As an organisation, we're prioritising what we're putting in and when, because otherwise we'd just be getting our IT department to bring in everything together and it never lands. So absolutely, I think they're fantastic. We need to make sure they come in at the right point.
Thank you.
Are you responsible financially for guarding the coastline against the Norfolk yesterday where they definitely?
Well, that's an interesting point, because one of the things we need to develop, I think we do have a problem with border security, and the reason that's particularly pertinent in Suffolk is not just because of what we saw in Harwich, which of course is in Essex, but a lot of people don't realise that Suffolk has more sailing boats and marinas than anywhere else in the country apart from the Solent. It's very important for our tourist economy and leisure economy, brings a huge amount of money into Suffolk, a lot of job opportunities, but of course with that goes the opportunity for criminals. You remember that joker who landed at Orford Quay last year, a Ukrainian. He admitted, I think it was to 7 trips, that was probably only half of the ones he'd done, all with illegal immigration. That's got to be stopped, but you can't do that unless we've got the resources to do it. We haven't got the resources separately, but we are looking at something we can do with the Special Constabulary. What I think we should be doing is looking if we could get a government grant for a joint approach, and we've discussed this before, with Border Control, Coast Guards, ourselves and the National Crime Agency, to see if we could launch an initiative to actually protect Suffolk coast a lot better. It's so important from the leisure side, illegal immigration, but also commercially, if you think of the courts of Felixstowe, Ipswich and of course those stuff, with all the offshore investment, whether one likes it or not, the reality is vast amounts of pound notes are being spent in the North Sea, and it needs to be looked after. So that's something we're looking at, and hopefully the next Police Innovation Fund round we will put a bid in, maybe for a few million quid, and see if we get it. Now, the lady at the back waiting for a question.
Actually, 3 questions. I saw a documentary not long ago about companies who were providing policing in some towns in Britain, and they were quite separate from the police, and they were paid for by businesses and people independently, and they work in that way. And recently I was talking to some people who were security people in Ipswich, there's a few of them, and they're paid for by businesses and so on. How do you feel about that? Do you feel there's conflict, or that do they work with you, or are you happy about that?
Right, that's a good straight bouncer, that's no problem at all. I will answer it. Right, my own view is, in certain circumstances it's possible, but the primary policing needs to be kept, certainly here in Suffolk, as Suffolk Constabulary, no question about that. There are already situations where policing is part-funded, perhaps with a small p. Several towns and parishes have part-funded PCSOs, even in some schools, for example. So that's another dimension. You can only do that, in my view, where there's consent from all parties involved. If we look at Ipswich, at the Business Improvement District, Ipswich Central, they actually get the businesses to pay through their business rates, I think it's 2.5% of the net business rate revenue income, goes to support Ipswich Central, where they have wardens, marshals, range they call them in Ipswich. They're looking at that in Bury, and they're certainly looking it up with the bid up in Lowestoft. So there is a role for that, but they only have certain powers at the behest of the Chief Constable and so on. So we need to get the balance right, but I don't think, my own view is, no, we wouldn't end up with a private police force. I'm certainly opposed to that, because I don't think that would have the public trust and confidence, and it needs to be independent. You can't be, I suppose, in a way, a servant of 2 masters potentially. But I do think these, if you like, security services, if we call them that, have a role to play, but only at a low level, and they work with the police. And I'll give you another example. If you look at Ipswich, we've actually put some money in to support 1 or 2 schemes there for the nighttime economy. So, for example, taxi marshalling. So getting an orderly queue for taxis, so you don't get the yobs louting about at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, jumping ahead of the queue of some of the girls or whoever you want to queue up. The taxi drivers actually get their money, and if they're completely stoned out of their mind and about to be ill, they don't get a taxi. We put £5,000 in for that, the Borough Council put £5,000 in, and so does Ipswich Central. So that's the sort of model I think that can work in certain circumstances. The advantage of that is if you talk to the Ipswich Police and Commander Lou Pepper, she said, well, they've been able to reduce the number of officers there in the night-time economy, and I think, well, Danny, not perhaps because of those schemes, if you do it properly, it does have a positive impact. So it's a bit of a convoluted answer, but there is a role, but not as a primary police source. No, I wouldn't agree with it. I don't know if you would.
I mean, I guess we've been working with private security firms for years, but it is more regulated now. So door staff is a really good example. You know, there's what would have been called before, I guess, bouncers standing on doors. They're now very heavily accredited and
Sure, it was just
regulated.
that this is the first time I've sort of seen them in the streets out there generally policing rather than at a premise or something. You know, it seemed to be, from the documentary I saw, plus from speaking to people in Ipswich, it seemed like it was all came at the same time. I thought, well, this is the new way.
No, certainly just echo what Tim says, is we are here to prevent and detect crime and keep people safe. That's our job, and that will always be our job. But we will, we'll work with other security agencies as well. And as Tim has said, if people are going for accreditation to have certain powers, that all has to come through me for me to approve.
You see, if they're paying for this through 2.5% of their business tax or whatever, and it's going to those people, I just wonder why it just doesn't come to you for those extra. Why is it some other body who have no powers rather than you who do?
Because it's in a very tight geographic area, it's not something that's spread out all over the whole county. And there are certain things they do, for example, in Ipswich, that's the example I know best, where they get involved in helping to prevent shoplifting, preventing crime. And don't forget, crime prevention isn't just down to the police. We've all got a responsibility, local authorities do it. So it's not an unusual one, it's just perhaps sometimes it isn't explained to people how it actually works. Now, and the other thing is, I'm not sure that you always solve the problem by chucking yet more of other people's money at it. You've got to get the balance right of how we approach things. And that's something that the business improvement districts, they vote on it, so it's not imposed. That's what they decide to do, and I think it would be difficult to say to business they should contribute even more. And just on that subject, I think they provide about a third of the money for policing through business rates. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's a sizable chunk. Yet they have no representation in the way policing is done. We all have a vote, but businesses per se, who provide a lot of money, don't have a direct vote. And we set up a proper business liaison group that meets 4 times a year, representatives, and I think at least they're getting some say on that, so we can discuss all sorts of things like that. But it's a different system, there's no question about it. Very interesting question. And another one.
Well, another question, kind of moving on from that, but as my question is, there was not so, just a few years ago, there was a crime to wildlife laws that came out.
Yeah.
So the police had to, there were new powers to protect wildlife, and if you see some crime to wildlife, you phone up and get a number or something, and the police will investigate it. So my first question is this working well? Does this happen? Is it efficient? And then my next question is, if it isn't, would this be an area where this separate policing by another body would work better?
Okay, right. One of the first things that happened. Sorry? Well, they're not really police source, but that's an interesting comment. The point about wildlife crime, we now have a new dedicated rural crime team, which didn't exist before I was elected. It's run by PC Mark Grant, who you've seen on the telly a few times. That works really, really well, and he has direct links with the National Wildlife Crime Agency. So where there are serious cases, that can be referred to others and resources brought in to deal with it. The Rural Crime Unit does deal with particular issues such as wildlife crime. You'll see some of those horrendous issues of fly tipping recently. One down here in Baber, I think it was at Long Melford, one up at Walsham Willows up near where I am. Illegal hair coursing, we've got an excellent track record because of the work that Mark has done there. cases of illegal hair courses are down by 80% compared with 3 years ago. And that's because it's a properly equipped and properly resourced team. And the message being, if these young them to come here, 99% of hair courses have a criminal record. They're not welcome in Suffolk, and their lives are made damned uncomfortable. So they don't come here so much now. So it does work. You can always do more. And one of the other things that I've signed up to is the new National Rural Crime Network. It's only just started. I think 20 odd PCCs have put in £1,000 in each, and we've got a government grant. And someone was just showing me all that. If you'd like to pick up some information on that on the way out, there is an extensive survey that's being done right across England and Wales, and we'd be very welcome if you would complete, anybody can complete that, because that will help us guide and formulate policing, particularly in rural areas, as we move forward. So it is a serious issue. I mean, you mentioned the RSPCA, that's an important body.
They don't apparently have so much money. If you see there's injuries to wildlife, apparently they've said that they don't have the funding for that anymore.
Who doesn't want
The RSPCA, they haven't got the money for caring for wildlife.
Right, well I can't personally comment on that, but what I can certainly say is it is in our police and crime plan. It is in there under a separate heading. You've only got to look at the coverage as being Spring Watch at Minsmere. It is part of our heritage. It's of global significance.
Yes.
And it is definitely something we take really seriously. But of course, as with all crime, the public need to report it.
Sure.
And that is really critical that people do that, because if these guys can't do anything, they don't know about it. And if you're not satisfied with the response, that's where the accountability bit comes in with Gareth. And you can always write to me, and we will definitely take it up, I can assure you. Really, it's part of our heritage after all, and it's got to be looked after. But good question. Anybody else? The lady here.
I won't bore you with Benjamin Street.
Okay. Well, if I had a magic wand, we would solve it. We build a bypass, but I bet you there'd be a heck of a lot of controversy about that as
I'm a
well.
resident of Hadleigh.
Right. Yep.
Speeding through the village is reaching hideous proportions.
Okay.
And it's also pounded, because as you leave the village coming towards Hadleigh,
Yep.
you've got 5/10 of a mile, which is no speed limit. The village is 30 limit, 5/10 of a mile, no speed
What do we
limit.
mean?
We've had numerous accidents down there.
Yep.
Especially weekends when you get the born again motorcyclists out. They see a no speed limit sign, 60. Now that road has got a very, very tight blind down to
Yep.
left-hand end. The county council doesn't want to know about it, because they say there's not enough houses on that section of road. Now, if the speed was reduced there, it would slow the traffic coming into Benjamin Street anyway. Is there any way
Yes.
that someone other than a member of the public, please, can take it up with county council?
You can drop me a line, and I hope there will be some good news soon on this. And funny enough, I was talking, as I said earlier, talking to James Finch this afternoon. I think we need to stop all this fuss about rules and regulations for things like this, and a large dose of common sense needs to be provided. I know exactly where you mean. Sadly, too many politicians are devoid of actually implementing common sense, but we need to do it. And one of the things that has been looked at the County Council, I did actually give evidence last year, was to get a route-based strategy for all A and B roads. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be reduced down to 40 miles an hour, but where there are anomalies like that, I know exactly where you mean, and I personally think that is an anomaly. We need to apply common sense and actually sort that out. But there's always going to be, should I say, resistance from within of certain people, because it's going to cost this, that and the other. But I do think it's in legitimate public interest to look at areas like that. There are plenty of other bottlenecks, dangerous places on particularly B roads. Sadly, there have already been, I think, 5 deaths in the last 7 weeks on Suffolk's roads, and we need to do something about it. We are also looking at a new police motorcycle unit to help with enforcement, because some of these hoons are whizzed through the villages. I mean, I live on the A140, I know exactly what you mean, and we've got to do something. But I've spoken to Chris Spinks, the roads policing chap, and Gareth, and we are actually seriously looking at putting extra resources in for enforcement.
I believe it comes under Steve Mary's department, doesn't it?
I don't know. I don't actually know, but what I can certainly say is I've taken it up with them, and we'll mention this on the road safe board as well, because these areas have got to be addressed. I know exactly what you mean, but please bear with us, and I will try and do what I can to get that resolved.
I'll keep you to that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. So,
tailgating. It's, I'm wondering if we could have perhaps a tailgating day or link it with some other special activity, even if you don't actually do very much, but enough to get publicity on car radios and things like this to, get people to think about what they're doing, why they're seen on the backside of other people, because the person in front gets extremely nervous. They shouldn't do, but they do get extremely nervous. There seems to be a genuine attempt to try and force up their speeds, even within, speed limits. So, just a thought.
I think it's a really good idea.
They do that on that section that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I travel almost daily between Hadleigh and Hadleigh. And even today, you probably know the place. I pull out in the lane. You've got someone who's right up behind you. They're either flashing you or they're horn at you because they can see the no speed limit sign and you're only doing 35. Because you know when you get to that end, you do more than 35 and you're going to turn over.
But I think that's a really good idea to do something.
We've got some pretty good powers I think given to us, and the initiative that we said last week that we had around traffic enforcement around a variety of issues. We've not only looked at just sort of like what would have been traditional speeding, it does look at driver behaviour, filtering, jumping queues, etc. So the staff do look at it, but I'll certainly think
I will say that it's not the majority of drivers, it's the minority. Those that just couldn't care less.
And you need to make an example.
I own the road. I've got a car, so I own the road.
No, of course. There are minorities, I agree, but it's also a matter of looking and being considerate of other drivers, not just about these nutcases who behave like this. They need sorting out, definitely. So,
a bit further back, I'm an HGV driver, or was.
Yeah.
License on neighbourhood roads, way back. But I get a lot of drivers where I came into the office, I said, I've had a car, this cut me up coming off the shadow garage on the A14. Or give way some. Straight up, there's a lot of it, I don't get behind you, I go in front of them. Next they start playing the SUVs. Alright, we get back an SUV job, that's where you do car drivers.
That's what I'm saying. It's a minority.
It's not, it's...
Well, what we try to do, and that's then again, this bit about road safety. Most accidents, the professionals tell me, are caused because of either bad driving or driver error. Very occasionally, yes, something else happens, like a blowout of a tyre or whatever. That Shell filling station, the other side of the World Bridge, is dreadful. That's it, and it's far too small. The A14, of course, should have been a motorway, but it isn't. Can't do anything about that. But that is something we're taking up with Highways England about doing what we can to alter that slip road and so on there, and maybe we'll get somewhere within a few months, but it needs to be done. That's why we press very hard and actually got agreement from Highways England to have a 50-mile-an-hour limit over the bridge between both junctions. Well, the police think it will work, I have to say respectfully, because if you look at the data, the number of accidents are 300-400 metres past the Shell filling station. A lot of it is because of exactly what you've just said. At least if you slow the traffic down, there is more room or time. It's not going to solve it completely, of course not. But unless you redesign the slip roads and so on, we've got a problem. But I was really annoyed because there were only 20 objections to the 50 limit. 65,000 vehicles a day use that road. And the reason the Highways Agency gave was because it might take about 15-20 seconds more for a delivery on the Ransom Zero part of the state. It beggars belief. But we're still having a go.
It'll take 4 months to come over on a ship. 4 hours later.
Oh, I agree. This is where common sense goes out the window.
On the same basis, I don't know if everyone agrees, but junction 31 on the A12 at East Birmingham is truly evil, isn't it? I'm just seriously dangerous.
I think the problem is that the roads nowadays weren't made for the amount of traffic we've got.
No.
But is that one on the list of, is that one agree that it's a horrible traffic?
Yeah. Well, that's the sort of thing, again, it's not really... What happens, I think the police are the only statutory consultee on these things. So the Highways England, let's use the evidence from the statutory consultee and then ignore it. That's what they did. So you can imagine how pleased I was about it.
Do you ever get evidence from cameras on people's personal?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. No, we get people playing. I've just been cut up and I've got it all on camera. Yeah. In fact, you'll recall was there an incident in Norfolk, wasn't there, with a cyclist?
So I think that was the one that went out here.
Oh,
that was on Twitter, wasn't it? There was another incident that came across and somebody had absolutely caught them there.
Well, I don't know about other ones, but I've it's beginning or have now got front-facing cameras on our artists.
A lot of big businesses are using it for crash reduction. Because it's crash reduction, crashes are costing them so much money. A lot of businesses are using it and the evidence is there for us to use.
And I think I'm right in saying, Gareth, each fatality on the roads probably costs somewhere about £1.5 million of taxpayers' money to investigate it and bring it to closure. So we've got to do, we need to look at this seriously. So, anybody got any other questions? Good man, yeah, good. You get 3 for the price of 1.
It vexes me that I've seen people convicted in the courts and they get away with a derisory £50–60 of recovery of costs. And I cannot understand, with the amount of police time that's involved, not just the immediate police constable, but all the overheads, the inspector's time and all this kind of thing, that such derisory sums are still being punted out by magistrates who seem to be living in some kind of different era. Now, is there some way you can get to these magistrates and say, well, look, it's costing a lot more.
Yes.
We might need to start putting some realistic costs in these when we're on these convictions.
Yeah. I do entirely agree with you. One of the difficulties I think magistrates or anybody in the judiciary will tell you, of course, a lot of this comes down to the sentencing guidelines that they have. And I have to say some of those are archaic and frankly years out of date, and by definition. And that is something we can try and take up with the local criminal justice board that both Gareth and I sit, and that covers Suffolk and Norfolk. But there needs to be a better mechanism to go forwards to go to, I think, is it the Sentencing Guidelines Council or some bunch of people, something like that. And that's where we need to do that. And again, that needs to be conversations with the Lord Chancellor. It does need revision. And it's not just cost recovery. I think what some people would say, some of the sentencing and fines are frankly far too lenient. But to be fair to the judiciary, very often they will tell you their hands are tied, and they are, because the sentencing has not caught up with their modern day life. But that's, you're not the first person to say that, so that is certainly something we need to try and take forward on the road.
When we've had issues locally, we do police prosecutions now, particularly around road traffic offences. Magistrates weren't giving us the costs that we were able to get through legislation. Then we did go in and discuss it with the chair of the bench to ensure that we were getting the appropriate funding, because of course it's not there to make profit. It's there to cover the costs of the people presenting the prosecutions. And in fact, it's absolutely necessary for us to be able to do that function. So where we can, we will influence it.
Anybody else? Right, well, just before we finish, I do need to thank John, our cameraman at the back. He's a volunteer. The recording of tonight's meeting will be put on the website fairly soon, and if you're really interested, you can look at all the others in the next week or two. Very interesting questions, very, very helpful for us as we move forward to planning, not just for 2 days, tomorrow and Friday. So thank you very, very much indeed for coming and giving up your evening. And if I could just say once again, there's that rural crime survey at the back, and fill in your details so we can keep in touch. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.